All right, y'all. Welcome back to Correctional Officer Stories with Steve. No hat today, y'all. Just rocking that fade up. You know what I'm saying? No, I'm kidding. Listen, I want to talk today about GP inmates. In my opinion, they're much easier to work with versus protective custody inmates. And the reason I'm going to say that is because there's a lot more structure on the yard when it comes to a GP yard versus a protective custody yard. Now, there's some differences in protective custody yards. I worked, there's a yard out at a facility that I worked at, and it's a debriefer pod, which is protective custody, but it's completely different. There remains a little bit more structure in there. That debriefer pod no longer exists. They mixed them in with the rest of the protective custody, but that was different from working a protective custody yard. Getting back to GP yards, they're so different in the fact that there's a lot of structure on there. There's a lot more respect. There's more of the gang activity in there. There's all the politics. There's drugs, cell phones, you name it. You got the shot callers on the yard. But as an officer, if you're a respectful officer and they respect you, then you can go to them, as I've said in some previous videos, and you can get the yard under control if there's some youngsters that come to the yard and they're acting out, or they're not following what the program is of the prison in the particular yard. You can go to them and be like, hey, listen, can you get this particular person in check? And usually a lot of times they'll do that, and you won't have any more issues. Now, you can't approach a head and be all disrespectful about it. Hey, can you get this motherfucker in check and blah blah blah. You got to be respectful about it, but it can be done, and you're just going to see a lot more structure. Now, are there a lot of GP yards left? Not really, not in Arizona, especially if you're working state prison. It's mainly protective custody now. I just visited a yard today that I worked a lot back in the day, and it's a general population yard, GP, but it's now a release yard. You got to have 60 days or less to the gate to be on that yard, and it's a pretty good program. It's to reduce recidivism and get them jobs when they get out. But those are all GP inmates. Super respectful today. Went out there for it was different being out there and not in uniform and working for a different company. But I didn't have any issues. Did I feel a little bit apprehensive still? Yeah, because it's a little bit lackadaisical out there, just the way the yards ran. But it's 60 day. They're looking at it as a 60-day release. Nothing's gonna happen. These guys aren't gonna screw up. Bullshit. If there's something going to go on and needs to happen, it's still going to happen. It's still general population, and it's still the politics. That's what people don't realize. You still have the politics on a GP yard, whether they're on a 60-day release yard or a lifer program. It doesn't matter. There's still shot callers on the yard, and if you need to put in work, you need to put in work, period. But I definitely will say I'd rather work a GP yard any day over a protective custody yard, just because of the disrespect. There's a lot of disrespect. There's a lot of GP, they call them dropouts. There's a lot of protective custody inmates that are respectful that dropped out because they just didn't want to follow the gang politic anymore. But those are few and far between now, because there's a lot of youngsters on the yard that couldn't hack it in GP and had to bounce out. They had to roll up, meaning they checked in.